Imagine New York City in 1933. I mean, you're deep in the trough of the Great Depression.
Right. It's a bleak time.
It's a bleak time.
Yeah.
1 in 5 people are out of work. There's this fear that's just thick in the air. Now, picture this incredibly specific scene.
Okay.
You have 2,500 people, and these are mostly professionals, executives, high-income earners.
Not the people you'd think were the most desperate.
Exactly. Folks pulling down anywhere from $2,000 to $50,000 a year, which back then, I mean, that made them the sophisticated elite. And they are absolutely stampeding into the grand ballroom of the Pennsylvania Hotel.
A stampede?
What could possibly create that kind of desperate, singular focus in the most cynical city on earth, especially during an economic abyss like that?
Yeah. What was it?
They weren't there for charity, not for a bailout. They were drawn by one single audacious newspaper advertisement. And it promised 3 things: increase your income, learn to speak effectively, and prepare for leadership.
The big 3.
The big 3. So why were these successful people, these architects, lawyers, engineers, so intensely hungry for just one course? Well, the reason is that their formal education, all the Latin verbs, all the college sheepskins, it had utterly failed to teach them the single most essential skill for success. And that desperate hunger for mastering human relations, well, that is the precise subject of our deep dive today. Welcome to Awesome Chapters.
We are diving deep into the source material that really became the principles of that very course. We're talking about the timeless lessons revealed in How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Such a classic.
It's a classic for a reason. And this text, it was founded in that urgency and pragmatism of the Depression era and was all distilled by Dale Carnegie, a man whose own life story is, I think, as much a testament to transformation as the lessons he taught.
In Carnegie's course, it wasn't just a one-off seminar, right? This thing had been running successfully in New York City every single season for 24 years.
24 years.
Yeah. It trained more than 15,000 business and professional men. And these weren't just random people. We're talking about skeptical, established organizations like Westinghouse, McGraw-Hill, the New York Telephone Company.
Big names.
They were all sending their high-level executives to these classes.
And that context is so critical. The narrator who documented Carnegie's methods, he points out that the sheer fact that these highly educated adults were flocking to this training years after college is, and this is a quote, a glaring commentary on the shocking deficiencies of our educational system.
Wow.
They needed the technique of getting along with and influencing people. It was a skill their formal education had just completely ignored.
So today, we're going to reveal the just startling data that proved the need for this training. We're going to start with the results of a massive academic study, cost $25,000, which uncovered the deepest cravings of adults.
And then we're going to explore some shocking stories that really illustrate these truths, like how Abraham Lincoln, the master of restraint, only learned to stop criticizing people after he nearly avoided a duel fought with cavalry broadswords.
I can't wait to get into that one.
And we'll analyze why notorious public enemies, guys like Al Capone and Two Gun Crowley, why they never blame themselves for their actions.
And finally, we're going to uncover the counterintuitive secrets that Charles Schwab and John D. Rockefeller Sr. used to inspire this intense loyalty and generate millions, proving that genuine appreciation is, well, it's a better weapon than any criticism. This deep dive is truly a masterclass in understanding and leveraging human nature. Okay, so let's unpack this moment in history. Carnegie, he's teaching in the YMCA at first, and his curriculum is pretty simple. It's just public speaking.
Right, basic stuff.
But his students, these are businessmen, they're paying on the installment plan. They were not interested in theory. They came back every single week demanding results. Results they could use the very next day in, difficult business negotiations, social contacts, at home.
That financial pressure, that's the key, right? And that intense student demand, it just forced Carnegie to pivot. It evolved the curriculum into this ultra-practical blended system. It combined public speaking, salesmanship, applied psychology. It had to deliver.
It had to deliver immediate, measurable success, or those businessmen just weren't going to pay the next installment.
Exactly.
And this demand, it wasn't just anecdotal. It was confirmed by this huge 2-year, $25,000 survey. It was conducted by institutions like the University of Chicago and the American Association for Adult Education. They really wanted to find out what adults were truly interested in studying.
And the findings were, well, they were profound. The number one interest, health, which, that's logical.
Makes sense.
But the second interest was the real shocker. It was developing skill in human relationships, the technique of getting along with and influencing other people. This wasn't some niche interest. It was the second great universal longing of the entire adult population.
And the survey really emphasized they didn't want, esoteric, high-sounding talk about psychology.
No theory.
No theory. They wanted practical, immediately usable suggestions. And this just confirms that desperate rush to the Pennsylvania hotel. These high-income earners, they recognize that a college degree might get your foot in the door, but the biggest, most enduring business successes, they were being won by those who could articulate their ideas and master human relations.
It's kind of a shortcut to distinction, isn't it? The sources note that a person who can speak acceptably is often given credit for ability that's way out of proportion to what they actually possess.
That's so true.
It puts a man or woman in the limelight. But the ability to speak, that's just the packaging, the content, that human relations core. That's the real engine.
And to really get that system, we have to look at Carnegie himself. His early life story is just this narrative of desperation and drive. Born 10 miles from a railway on a Missouri farm, his life was just defined by poverty.
Right, and that led to this acute inferiority complex.
It did. And you have to think about the depth of this poverty. He was attending state teachers college, but he couldn't afford a warm place to stay. He talks about having to crawl out of his blankets at 3 in the morning in the bitter cold just to feed these pedigreed Duroc Jersey pigs.
And the pigs were kept inside, right?
They were kept in a basket behind the kitchen stove just to stop them from freezing. That is a stark image of hardship.
Absolutely. And that inferiority complex, it just drove him. He sought distinction through college debating contests and public speaking. It was really the only way a poor farm boy could achieve any kind of status among his wealthier peers.
But the real world, as it often is, was brutal. After college, his attempt to sell correspondence courses in Nebraska was a total failure. He was so discouraged that he threw himself onto a hotel bed and just wept with despair.
And this is the future master of human relations.
This is the guy weeping over his inability to sell a product. He was so broke he had to travel on a freight train, watering 2 carloads of wild horses just to get to Omaha.
That failure, though, it led him to Armour & Company, selling bacon, soap, and lard in the rugged badlands of western South Dakota.
And his territory was ranked, 25th out of 29 routes? Basically dead last. But he used this intense resourcefulness.
And that resourcefulness, it wasn't just sales skill, it was relationship management. The source gives this great anecdote. When a storekeeper couldn't pay him in cash,
Right.
Carnegie accepted payment in shoes. And then he sold the shoes to railroad men in Omaha.
That's incredible.
By thinking outside the box, by building these non-standard relationships, he boosted that unproductive territory to first place in just 2 years.
And yet, he resigned from that success. He tried acting, which he hated. He tried selling Packard motor trucks, which he hated even more because he just didn't care about machinery. He realized he needed time to pursue his true passion, which was writing. And this led him to quit and seek out night teaching work.
And here is the pivot. He recognized that the public speaking training he'd sought in college had given him more confidence, more courage, more ability to deal with people than all of his other courses combined.
It was the only immediately applicable skill.
The only one.
So he pitches this idea of teaching businessmen public speaking to the YMCA. And they initially refused. They thought the idea of turning businessmen into orators was ridiculous.
Of course.
They only agreed on the condition that they would not pay him a salary, only commission.
And that commission structure, you could argue, was genius because it forced the evolution into the ultra-practical system that we're diving into today. Within 3 years, due to this overwhelming demand and proven results, the YMCA was paying him $30 a night. His students, these hard-nosed businessmen, they had refined his curriculum into a master class on applied psychology that was, as the source describes it, as real as the measles and twice as much fun.
Okay, so we've got the origin story. Let's jump into the very first fundamental technique. And it requires us to swallow a kind of a bitter pill about human nature. We have to address that immediate human impulse to criticize when someone is clearly wrong.
And Carnegie's primary rule here is that criticism is fundamentally futile. Because, he says, in 99 cases out of 100, no man ever criticizes himself for anything. no matter how egregious his mistake.
So the moment you criticize, you're just triggering the, what does he call it, the powder magazine of pride.
That's the one. You assume that if you point out an obvious flaw, the other person will see the light and confess their error. But the source shows us that our ego, our vanity, it just kicks in instantly to rationalize and justify our actions.
And the most dramatic proof of this comes from the annals of crime. I mean, take Two Gun Crowley, notorious killer, eventually cornered and captured after this dramatic shootout. He's sentenced to the electric chair. Did he express any remorse?
Not a bit.
Absolutely not. He claimed he was being punished for defending myself. He truly believed he was the victim, that he was being persecuted by society. He wrote this letter from the death house saying, "Underneath my coat is a weary heart, but a kind heart, one that would do nobody any harm."
It's unbelievable. And it gets worse. Al Capone, public enemy number one, the mastermind of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as
A public benefactor.
a public benefactor, an unappreciated and misunderstood public benefactor. Dutch Schultz, another violent gangster, also insisted he was a public benefactor.
And Warden Laws of Sing Sing, who dealt with the most hardened criminals, he confirmed this. Very few of the men under his care ever considered themselves bad. They rationalized their acts, believing firmly they were justified or, victims of circumstance.
So the critical takeaway for us is this. If the most sinister, violent men on earth facing execution refuse to criticize themselves, why on earth do we expect the people we deal with daily, our coworkers, our kids, our spouses, to just immediately roll over and accept our criticism? That human instinct for self-justification is practically universal.
And this futility, it plays out not just in crime, but in high-stakes politics and history. You look at the devastating political quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft.
Right.
Roosevelt publicly denounced his former friend Taft for conservatism. It split the Republican Party, and it handed the 1912 election to Woodrow Wilson.
So did Taft change his mind after that criticism? No. He tearfully insisted, "I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have." The criticism only solidified his position. It forced him further into a defensive stance.
Or you consider the Teapot Dome scandal with Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior. He was condemned nationwide for corruption, sent to prison. When Herbert Hoover suggested that President Harding died from the stress of being betrayed by a friend, Mrs. Fall screamed that her husband was the one who was betrayed and crucified.
So even the justice system's criticism did nothing but fuel this sense of martyrdom. The lesson is just crystal clear. Criticism is a dangerous spark. If you want to stir up resentment that can rankle for decades, just indulge in a little stinging criticism no matter how right you think you are.
And this brings us to the ultimate teacher of restraint, Abraham Lincoln. Early in his life, he was notorious for writing these scathing, ridiculing letters and poems, often published anonymously in the papers.
And that habit led to the single most dangerous situation of his entire life.
The duel.
The duel. He wrote this particularly cutting poem ridiculing a sort of a bombastic politician named James Shields. Shields was outraged. He demanded the author's name, and he challenged Lincoln to a duel.
And Lincoln, having the choice of weapons because he was the challenged party, chose cavalry broadswords.
Which is ironic, right, because of his long arms. It gave him an advantage.
A huge advantage. So they meet on a sandbar in the Mississippi River, fully prepared to fight to the death, until their seconds intervene and manage to stop the combat at the very last moment.
And that brush with death, it taught Lincoln an invaluable, life-altering lesson.
From that day forward, he almost never criticized anyone for anything.
Yeah.
His personal motto became that biblical admonition, "Judge not, that ye be not judged."
And you see this discipline play out so tragically during the Civil War. General after general, McClellan, Pope, Burnside, they blundered repeatedly. It cost thousands of lives, delayed the end of the conflict. Half the nation condemned these incompetent leaders, but Lincoln, constantly frustrated, held his peace publicly.
The people spoke harshly of the Southern rebels. Lincoln would just gently remind them, don't criticize them. They're just what we would be under similar circumstances. He understood that criticism only feeds animosity.
Now, the most famous example of his restraint, General Meade at Gettysburg.
Yes.
Lee's army was trapped against the swollen Potomac River. Lincoln saw the ultimate golden opportunity to capture the entire Confederate force and just end the war, then and there. He ordered Meade to attack immediately.
And Meade defied him. He called a council of war, he hesitated, he procrastinated until the waters receded, allowing Lee and his army to escape safely across the Potomac.
Lincoln was absolutely devastated.
And in his bitter disappointment, Lincoln wrote Meade a letter, a truly scathing rebuke, detailing his incompetence and the lost opportunity. He wrote, "Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it."
But here is the critical action that defines the principle. Lincoln never mailed that letter. It was found among his private papers after his death.
Why?
He reasoned that sending it would achieve nothing. It would only make Meade justify himself, arouse hard feelings, and possibly force his resignation at a critical time. Lincoln chose silence over justifiable criticism.
Okay, wait. If criticism is out, and Meade's error cost thousands of lives and prolonged the war, how is correction or improvement even possible? I mean, does Carnegie suggest we just let people continue making terrible mistakes without any comment?
And that's the challenge, right? Carnegie doesn't suggest silence, but diplomacy. The goal isn't to criticize, it's to change behavior without arousing resentment. We're going to cover those specific tactical methods later in Section 6. But for the foundational principle, the rule stands. Criticism is useless because it provokes defense and it damages a man's precious sense of worth.
So therefore, the essential first rule of dealing with people is stark and unforgiving. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid ID. So if we can't criticize, we have to understand the inverse. What's the deepest psychological urge that drives human behavior? What tool do we use instead of criticism? We have to turn to the core of motivation.
And Sigmund Freud, he called it the desire to be great. Professor John Dewey, one of America's most profound philosophers, he refined this. He called it the desire to be important, and this is the foundational concept upon which all human relations are built.
The source outlines the 8 core human wants, food, sleep, health, sex, money, all that. But the feeling of importance, this craving to be recognized and needed, is almost as deep, almost as imperious as the desire for food or sleep.
But unlike food or sleep, it's perpetually unsatisfied in most people.
Right.
And this craving is so powerful, so central to our identity, that if it's denied in the real world, people will literally manufacture it in their minds. The source confirms this through medical observation, detailing the link between this denied craving and insanity.
The head physician of a major hospital for the insane noted that while half of mental diseases have organic causes, the other half of patients who go insane, they appear physically fine. They find in the dreamland of insanity the feeling of importance that's been denied to them in reality.
And the striking example is the patient whose life was a tragedy. No love, no social standing. She went insane, and in her imagination, she divorced her husband. She now insisted on being called Lady Smith, believed she married into the English aristocracy, and, most poignantly, she imagined she had a new child every night.
That is just profound. She created a world where she was perpetually loved, important, and productive. And a doctor noted that he wouldn't restore her sanity even if he could, because she was much happier as she is.
So if people are willing to sacrifice reality for sanity, to go insane just to achieve that sense of importance, imagine the incredible power we unleash by giving them honest appreciation and importance in the real world. And this brings us to the $1 million secret.
Charles Schwab. He was paid $1 million a year, a staggering sum at the time, equivalent to tens of millions today. And he was one of only 2 men in history, along with Walter Chrysler, to achieve that pay grade. And his genius, it wasn't in metallurgy.
No, Schwab was surrounded by men who knew more about the technical manufacture of steel than he did. He earned that money because of his ability to deal with people. His secret, which he articulated very clearly, was appreciation and encouragement.
Schwab said, "I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among the men the greatest asset I possess. The way to develop the best that is in a man is by appreciation and encouragement." He would only praise and never criticize. He said, "If I like anything, I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise."
And this stands in direct contrast to the management styles of his era, which relied on fear, yelling, constant correction. Schwab recognized a deeper truth. No man, however great or exalted, puts forth greater effort under criticism than under a spirit of approval.
John D. Rockefeller Sr. demonstrated this principle perfectly after one of his partners, Edward T. Bedford, made this massive blunder in South America, lost the firm $1 million.
$1 million back then was an earth-shattering loss. The expectation would be immediate scathing criticism, maybe even termination. But Rockefeller did the opposite. He found something to praise.
He congratulated Bedford for saving 60% of the money he invested. He said, "That's splendid. We don't always do as well as that upstairs."
And by focusing on what Bedford salvaged rather than what he lost, Rockefeller achieved 2 things. First, he showed he understood the situation was closed, it was unchangeable. Second, he fed Bedford's desire for importance and appreciation, which guaranteed future loyalty and prevented resentment. Criticism would have accomplished nothing but resentment and fear.
Now, this principle is powerful, but we have to clarify the difference between appreciation and flattery. I think a lot of managers confuse the two, and that leads to cynicism.
And that distinction is the ethical core of Carnegie's system. Flattery is counterfeit. It comes from the teeth out. It's usually self-serving. It's telling the other man precisely what he already thinks about himself, regardless of effort.
Right. Whereas true appreciation, on the other hand, is sincere. It comes from the heart out. It focuses on genuine effort or achievement or some intrinsic value you observe in the other person. King George V had this maxim, "Teach me neither to proffer nor receive cheap praise." We have to find those good points in people and voice them honestly.
When we stop focusing on our own needs and genuinely focus on the valuable efforts of others, we give them the nourishment their self-esteem craves. And they will, as the source promises, cherish your words and treasure them and repeat them over a lifetime.
Okay, let's move to the practical tactical rules, the tools we can use every day. And the first one is foundational, and it's drawn from the simplest creature.
The dog. Carnegie's childhood pet, Tippy, a little yellow-haired puppy, made a living purely by giving love and effusive attention. And the lesson is revolutionary. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years, by desperately trying to get other people interested in you.
That seems so counterintuitive, though. In professional life, we're taught to sell ourselves, to project our achievements. But that focus on I is precisely the barrier to connection.
It is. The New York Telephone Company did this study and found the word I was used 3,990 times in just 500 phone conversations.
Wow.
We're obsessed with ourselves. The Viennese psychologist Alfred Adler warned that it is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. All human failures, he said, spring from this lack of connection.
And you can contrast that with someone like Howard Thurston, the magician. He made $2 million, was the dean of legerdemain for 40 years. He said his secret wasn't magic tricks.
No, his secret was showmanship and a genuine practiced love for his audience. Before every single show, he would look at the crowd and repeat to himself, "I love my audience, I love my audience." He was authentically grateful they came to see him, and that appreciation translated into this powerful, reciprocal affection.
Theodore Roosevelt used this same skill. He had this honest liking for people, particularly humble people. He'd greet White House staff, even the kitchen maids, by name and ask specific personal questions about their family or their recipes. That genuine interest was one of the reasons he was one of the most popular men in America.
So rule 1 is foundational. Become genuinely interested in other people.
The second rule is a nonverbal tool, and we already touched on its dollar value. Charles Schwab said his smile was worth $1 million.
Rule 2, smile. A real smile just speaks volumes. It says, "I like you, you make me happy, I'm glad to see you." It's an action that supersedes words and signals approachability and goodwill.
The source gives this fascinating anecdote about a guy named William B. Steinhardt, a member of the New York Curb Exchange, who was a notorious grouch. He decided to force himself to apply this rule.
So he starts at home, greets his wife with a "Good morning, my dear," and a smile. He noted that she was bewildered and shocked by the change.
I can imagine.
But he persisted. He smiled at the elevator boy, the doorman, his coworkers. He found that adjustments to complaints became easier, and he quickly reported that smiles are bringing me dollars, many dollars, every day.
And the principle here, which is drawn from the philosopher William James, is that happiness doesn't depend on outward conditions, but on our inner attitude. If you don't feel like smiling, force yourself to act as if you were already happy, and the feeling will often follow the action.
Moving to rule 3, this is the political superpower used by almost every great leader. Remember that a man's name is to him the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
Jim Farley, who played a central role in putting Franklin D. Roosevelt in the White House, he understood this better than anyone. He remembered 50,000 names.
50,000.
And not just the names, but details about their family size, their business, their political opinions.
So when he met an acquaintance a year later, he could call them by name, ask about their spouse, and inquire specifically about the hollyhocks in their backyard. This personalized recognition is a form of exquisite, subtle flattery. It feeds that deep craving for importance. Forgetting or misspelling a person's name does the opposite. It just signals we don't care enough to expend the effort.
Andrew Carnegie, recognizing the power of a name, secured the business of the Pennsylvania Railroad by naming his new Pittsburgh steel mill the Edgar Thomson Steel Works after the railroad's president. It's hard to imagine Thompson buying his steel rails anywhere else after that personalized honor.
And this attention to the other person, it leads directly to Rule 4. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Exclusive, undivided attention is perhaps the highest flattery you can possibly pay someone.
This is a mistake so many professionals make. They think they have to impress people with clever conversation, when in fact the most effective strategy is often to just listen and encourage.
The narrator's anecdote about the dinner party is perfect here. He went to a party with a distinguished botanist and spent hours just listening intently, asking probing questions, and expressing admiration for the botanist's knowledge. The narrator said hardly anything at all.
But when the botanist turned to the host later, he called the narrator a most interesting conversationalist and a brilliant man, solely because the narrator had given him this rapt, exclusive attention. Charles W. Eliot said, "Exclusive attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that."
And this is a critical lesson when you're dealing with complaints, too. There was this customer, Mr. Wooten, who returned a suit, and he was angry. He was won over by the head of the department, who simply sat and listened to the entire long, detailed story of the suit's failure without ever interrupting. Once the man felt heard, the department head was able to offer a resolution that was accepted instantly.
Now we move into Rule 5, which is really the philosophy of influence. Talk in terms of the other man's interests.
We have to remember the fishing analogy. We might love strawberries and cream, but fish prefer worms. Therefore, we bait the hook to suit the fish. Lloyd George, the British statesman, he kept his power when other wartime leaders were ousted because he had learned it was necessary to bait the hook to suit the fish. Why talk about what we want? That's just childish and ineffective.
The narrator demonstrated this brilliantly when he was negotiating a 300% rent increase on a hotel ballroom. He had already printed tickets, so this price hike was devastating to his course. But instead of complaining about his own financial loss, he focused the entire conversation on the hotel manager's advantage.
Right. He wrote down the advantages and disadvantages for the manager of keeping the Carnegie course versus losing it. The advantages were profit, sure, but also the prestige of having a famous course in their ballroom, attracting other clients, and avoiding the negative publicity of an empty, dark space. By focusing purely on the manager's perspective, he avoided the 300% increase and settled on just a 50% increase instead. He helped the manager achieve his goals.
And finally, Rule 6, which is the culmination of that core psychological urge. Make the other person feel important, and do it sincerely.
This feeds that deep, almost insatiable hunger for appreciation we discussed earlier. The post office clerk, bored by the monotonous grind of his work, was transformed when the narrator took the time to compliment him sincerely on his magnificent head of hair.
And the clerk just beamed, right? He said, "Many people have admired my hair." He went out to lunch walking on air. The narrator gained nothing material from that, but he gained the priceless feeling of adding genuinely to the total sum of human happiness just through a sincere act of recognition.
And the striking example of the Packard car really emphasizes this power. A lonely old woman, starving for recognition, showed a salesman her dream house, which was filled with cherished antiques. Paisley shawls, Wedgwood china, Italian paintings. The salesman expressed genuine, heartfelt admiration for her things.
So when he politely refused her offer of her late husband's almost new Packard car, suggesting her relatives should have it, she was adamant. She cried, "Relatives, yes, I have relatives who are just waiting till I die so they can get that car, but they are not going to get it. I am going to give it to you. You appreciate beautiful things."
That car was a material manifestation of her desperate need for human connection and sincere appreciation. She gave the car away because the salesman provided the emotional validation she craved. Sincere appreciation works magic because it satisfies the deepest need of the human spirit.
Okay, we shift now from making people like you to the art of subtle influence-winning people, to your way of thinking without resorting to command or argument. This is like the masterclass for leaders.
The first rule, which is foundational, is essentially a continuation of what we talked about in Section 2. Rule 1, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. But if you must engage, you have to proceed with extreme tact.
And that tact starts with respect. Rule 2, show respect for the other man's opinions. Never tell a man he is wrong.
We've already established that telling someone they are wrong hits directly at their pride and self-respect, creating instant resistance. So instead, we have to use diplomacy. The narrator points to Socrates, one of the greatest logicians, who never argued. He used the Socratic method, just asking questions that people could readily answer with yes, leading them naturally to his ultimate conclusion.
The moment you say, "you are wrong," you've lost the war. Regardless of whether you win the battle, we should use phrases like, "I may be wrong, I often am, let's look at the facts." It just disarms the other party immediately.
And if we are wrong, the third rule requires immense courage. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. This is where we leverage self-criticism to neutralize an adversary.
The story of the mounted policeman and Rex, the bulldog, illustrates this perfectly. The narrator had been warned not to walk Rex without a muzzle and leash in Forest Park. So when he saw the policeman again, he didn't wait to be criticized.
No, he immediately rushed to the officer, admitting guilt. He said, "Officer, you've caught me red-handed. I'm guilty. I have no alibis, no excuses. You warned me last week that if I brought this dog out here again without a muzzle, you would find me."
And that immediate, enthusiastic, almost self-flagellating admission of guilt completely disarmed the officer. The officer, needing to feel important and magnanimous, immediately softened. He minimized the law, and he took the narrator's side.
He said, "Well, a little dog like that isn't going to harm anybody. I'll tell you what you do. You just let him run over the hill there where I can't see him, and we'll forget all about it." He transitioned from prosecutor to protector. Had the narrator tried to argue or excuse himself, he would have started a bitter fight.
Right, and General Robert E. Lee used this at Gettysburg after Pickett's charge. He rode out to meet his beaten troops and took all the blame himself. He said, "All this has been my fault. I and I alone have lost this battle." That confession secured immense loyalty.
Rule 4 focuses on posture. Begin in a friendly way. This sets the emotional tone for the entire interaction. As Woodrow Wilson said, "If you come at me with fists doubled, mine will double just as fast. But if you approach me as a friend, we'll quickly find we are not so far apart."
The most incredible demonstration of this is John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s approach to the striking Colorado miners in 1915. The atmosphere was just boiling with hatred. These men wanted to hang him.
And after weeks of making friends, Rockefeller gave this masterful speech. He began, "This is a red-letter day in my life. We meet here not as strangers, but as friends, and it is in that spirit of mutual friendship that I am glad to have this opportunity." He was so gracious and appreciative.
He literally disarmed them with friendliness. He conned 2 years of violent hatred. They went back to work without another word about the wage increase they had been fighting for. Friendliness is the solvent for hostility.
Okay, moving to the deeper psychological principles of influence. Rule 5 is a critical strategy. Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately. This is directly tied to the Socratic method we were talking about.
The mental habit of saying no is hard to reverse. If someone says no initially, their pride is engaged in maintaining that stance. So a wise person starts with points of agreement, focusing on shared goals or values, building a momentum of assent before they pivot to the area of disagreement.
And Rule 6 is about control. Let the other man do a great deal of the talking. We often try to persuade others by talking ourselves, which is exhausting and, frankly, ineffective.
When Lincoln was considering the proclamation freeing the slaves, he invited an old neighbor to Washington and talked to him for hours about the pros and cons. Lincoln did all the talking, then sent the neighbor home without asking for advice.
He wasn't seeking counsel. He was seeking a sympathetic ear to unburden himself, which relieved his stress. When we talk only of ourselves, we show we are hopelessly uneducated in human relations. People want to feel heard.
And Rule 7 is the golden standard of psychological influence. Let the other man feel that the idea is his. This connects directly back to that craving for importance.
Colonel Edward M. House, who was President Woodrow Wilson's closest advisor, was a master of this. He would plant an idea casually in Wilson's mind, and when Wilson later proposed it as his own, House never corrected him. He didn't care about the credit. He only cared about the results, which made him invaluable to the president.
This applies perfectly to sales, too. The automobile dealer who was struggling to sell a used car to a Scotsman and his wife, he stopped pushing specific cars. He just encouraged the wife to list every single fault of every car they saw, listening raptly.
So when they inevitably circled back to the specific car the dealer wanted to sell, the Scotsman pointed out the flaws he himself had identified, and then he bought it, feeling that he had decided it was the best value. He sold himself, which is the only way true persuasion works.
Rule 8, which I think is often neglected, is crucial when someone is making a mistake. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view.
And this requires empathy and time. We have to pause and ask ourselves, why would they feel this way? What are their motives, their needs, their history? If we understand their viewpoint, we can approach them from their vantage point, which makes our arguments infinitely more compelling.
And Rule 9 suggests, be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. The source suggests we should use magic phrases like, I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do.
That phrase alone can stop an argument dead in its tracks. It signals understanding and mutual respect, which softens the other person immediately, and it prepares them to listen to your side.
Rule 10, the practical application of this empathy, is to appeal to the nobler motives. People generally have two reasons for doing something, one that sounds good and the real one.
Right. J.P. Morgan believed people usually act for a double reason. So to change a man, you appeal to his higher ideals, his sense of fairness, duty, or honor. For instance, if you're calling a landlord for an overdue bill, you don't say, you owe me money. You say, I know you are a man of integrity and you value your good credit.
Now for impact. Rule 11. Dramatize your ideas. Merely stating a truth is often insufficient in our modern age. You need showmanship.
When the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin faced rumors of having excessive advertising, they didn't just print figures. They clipped all the reading matter from one average day and published it as a 307-page book titled One Day. It proved vividly that they provided an enormous amount of news content for just 2 cents. It was visual proof that advertisers couldn't ignore.
That's powerful. The rat poison manufacturers used similar showmanship. They put 2 live rats in the window with their product, which immediately boosted sales by 500%. We have to remember that mere facts are dry. Showmanship brings them to life.
And finally, Rule 12, the motivator. Throw down a challenge. This appeals directly to the spirit of competition and that craving for importance.
Charles Schwab used this perfectly with a lagging steel mill. The manager complained that threats and coaxing had failed. Schwab arrived, asked the day shift foreman how many heats they made, and chalked a big 6 on the floor before walking away.
So the night shift comes in, they ask what the 6 means. When they're told the day shift made 6, they immediately rubbed it out and replaced it with a 7.
The competition was on.
It was on. The mill that had been lagging soon surpassed every other mill in the plant. Schwab had appealed to their desire for excellence.
And Warden Laws, he also took over the chaotic Sing Sing only after Al Smith challenged him, saying it would take a big man to run the place. Laws accepted the challenge, fueled by that desire to prove his importance, and he became the most famous warden alive. Okay, so we circle back now to the highest form of human relations. When correction is absolutely necessary, how do we change people without causing offense? We have to use the velvet glove.
The initial rule here is pure tact. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. This is the lather that prepares the mind to accept the criticism.
Calvin Coolidge, who is often called Silent Cal, was a master of this. He once praised his secretary's dress and commented that she was an attractive young woman before adding, "Now, don't get stuck up. I just said that to make you feel good. From now on, I wish you would be a little more careful with your punctuation." He sandwiched the criticism.
McKinley used the same diplomacy when a prominent Republican read him a campaign speech that was terrible. McKinley praised its strong points, focusing on the intention, before carefully explaining why the structure had to be altered. This maintained the speaker's dignity.
The second rule for tactile correction is to call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Direct criticism is a blow, and indirect suggestion is a gentle nudge.
Lyman Abbott's wife demonstrated this beautifully. He wrote this meticulous but poorly suited sermon. If she'd called it terrible, she would have sparked resentment. Instead, she remarked that it would make an excellent article for the North American Review, subtly suggesting it was too academic or unsuitable for speaking aloud. Abbott immediately understood, tore it up, and preached without notes.
Rule 3 is immensely effective. Talk about your own mistakes first. This lowers the barrier of resistance and saves face for the other person.
When the narrator needed to criticize his young, inexperienced secretary, Josephine, he first reflected on his own asinine mistakes at age 19. He began by saying, "You have made a mistake, Josephine, but the Lord knows it's no worse than many I have made. I have very little inclination to criticize you or anyone, but don't you think it would have been wiser if you had done so and so?"
By admitting his own fallibility, he made it far easier for Josephine to listen and accept the suggestion. It prevents that explosion in the powder magazine of pride.
And this leads to Rule 5, which deals with hierarchy and dignity. Let the other man save his face. Never demote or correct someone in a way that publicly humiliates them.
The famous example is the highly temperamental scientist Charles Steinmetz at General Electric. Executives needed to move him from one lab to another, which was a seemingly demoting transfer. Instead of just issuing an order, they assign him the exalted title of consulting engineer for the entire General Electric Company.
And this glorious title allowed him to leave his previous, less important work for a new job in Schenectady without feeling like he was taking a step down. He was happy, he felt important, and the GE executives got exactly what they needed without creating a crisis. Big men, the source stresses, are too big to gloat over personal triumphs or humiliate subordinates.
And finally, we have to bring these rules home, where appreciation is often the most neglected and criticism is the most lethal. The domestic rules are stark.
Rule 1 for the home: don't nag. The consequences of nagging are tragically illustrated throughout history. Empress Eugenie's constant nagging drove Napoleon to steal out by a little side door at night to seek companionship elsewhere.
And the devastating story of the Tolstoy. Countess Tolstoy, before she died, confessed to her daughters that she was the cause of her famous husband's death, that she had killed him with constant complaining and hysteria. Eventually, at age 82, Tolstoy fled his wife one snowy night and died in a railway station, requesting that she not even be permitted to enter his presence.
Even Lincoln, who mastered external human relations, failed at home. His marriage to Mary Todd was his lifelong tragedy, not his assassination. For 23 years, she constantly nagged and harassed him, criticizing his walk, his ears, everything he did. And the result? Lincoln regretted his marriage and avoided his home as much as possible, choosing wretched country hotels over his own wife's constant outbursts.
Nagging always destroys. So the inverse, then, is crucial. Rule 6 for the home: praise and appreciate.
Disraeli's successful marriage to Mary Ann, a wealthy widow 15 years his senior, thrived because he never criticized her and she constantly praised and admired him. He was wise enough to let her be herself, and in return, she made his life, in her own words, simply one long scene of happiness.
We have to be careful not to let the people who matter most, our family, feel that they are merely eating hay. I love the hay story. The farm woman set a pile of hay on the table because her family hadn't complimented her cooking in 20 years. They were just eating hay.
We starve the self-esteem of those closest to us through neglect, as the actor Warner Baxter noted. If a woman is to find happiness at all in her husband, she is to find it in his appreciation and devotion. If that appreciation and devotion is actual, there is the answer to his happiness also.
What we have seen today, from those desperate executives rushing to the Pennsylvania hotel to the devastating silence of Lincoln's unsent letter, is that the principles of human relations aren't about merely acquiring information. They're about forming new habits and committing to a new way of life.
Right. These sources offer such a profound understanding of human nature. People are creatures of emotion, they're motivated by pride and vanity, and above all else, they're driven by the craving to be important. If you can remember that and give people what they crave, sincere appreciation, recognition, respect for their opinions, you unlock the keys to influence.
And the journey to mastering human relations, it doesn't end here. Return for our next deep dive where we'll explore further applications of these principles in high-stakes environments, showing how world leaders, executives, and even ordinary people use these tactics to achieve the impossible.
And if you found these insights valuable, please take a moment to like this deep dive, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment. Your support really helps us continue bringing you the most important nuggets of knowledge extracted from the best sources available. Thank you for joining us.